Economic Development Agency here in Greater Hattiesburg. We are elated to have you on our webinar today entitled Maneuvering Through the Crisis, COVID-19 Update. We thought it would be very helpful to pull our ADP membership together in a video conference and have a diverse group of panelists provide an update related to COVID-19. You're going to hear from different sectors of the economy, including government, healthcare, small business, the banking sector. And these are all very important segments of the economy, and certainly very important related to COVID-19. By the way, today is Paint the City Red Day. And so the red certainly stands for courage and strength and hope and love. And we want to provide all of that for all of those on the front lines in the community and around our nation and state. And we also want to provide that for each other. We are definitely in it together in the crisis, and we'll maneuver through the crisis together. I would also be remiss if I didn't quickly mention that our thoughts and prayers are with those impacted with the Easter tornadoes. As if a pandemic wasn't enough, the tornadoes ravaged our area on Easter Sunday. And so our thoughts and prayers are with those communities. But Hattiesburgers and those in the Pine Belt are resilient, and we know that everyone will bounce back. So let me introduce our panelists today. We definitely have an esteemed group of panelists. First, we are very pleased to have our mayor, Toby Barker, mayor of the city of Hattiesburg. Mayor Barker, thank you for taking time to be with us today, and thank you for your clear communication and visibility throughout the crisis. We also are pleased to have Dr. Rambod Rouhbakhsh. Dr. Rouhbakhsh is a family medicine doctor at Hattiesburg Clinic, and he is also an associate director over the family medicine residency program at Forest General Hospital. Many of you have seen and heard from Dr. Rouhbakhsh throughout the COVID-19 crisis. He has been a face of the healthcare community and provided very valuable insight. From a small business perspective, most all of you I know have been frequenting Robert St. John's restaurants here in the Burg for many, many years. And we knew it was great to have a small business angle on this panel, as small businesses have been hit very hard by COVID-19. So we're pleased to have Robert St. John, a local restaurateur and entrepreneur. Robert, thank you for joining us today. Now, last but not least, we have the chairman of our ADP Board of Directors, our 2020 ADP Board Chair, Hoppy Cole. That's his, not his day job. His day job is the CEO of The First, which is our only publicly traded bank headquartered here in Hattiesburg. So, Hoppy, thank you for your chairmanship of the ADP. Didn't know we were going to have to maneuver through such items in 2020, but we'll certainly maneuver through, and thank you for joining us today. All right, so guys, let's jump right in with questions. And Mayor Barker, we will start with you. Mayor, thanks for, again, taking time to join us and for your leadership throughout the pandemic. We've talked a lot in the business world about having to pivot quickly during the crisis. What has this pivoting process looked like from a governmental standpoint? And how are you balancing decisions that impact the health and well-being of our citizens with the need to keep our economy moving forward?
Well, I think that we have tried to, had to navigate on a much faster pace than we normally do things. We used to be able to schedule things out over the course of a week or over the course of several days, and now it's things are going to change not only every day, but sometimes several times within a day. And I think that's one thing that we had to kind of get used to a new pace because the information we were getting and the decisions we were having to make were that fast paced. I think when this began, a lot of mayors and supervisors and legislative leaders around the state wanted to think that it would take longer to get to us and it would not be as intense as it has been. But I remember being in a meeting in early March about some other initiative, and Chad Edmondson said to me, you need to have your COVID plan together. And soon after that, I heard a podcast from Joe Rogan about the real health impact of what this could be in our country. And I got really concerned. And so we put together a stakeholder group. I think we're one of the first communities in the state to do that with health and education and other governmental leaders. And I really want to make sure that that I mentioned specifically David Hogan from the Forest County Board of Supervisors and Jody Waits from Lamar County have been just invaluable in this process, and Petal Mayor Hal Marks. And so having to put together a group very quickly, we were confronted that we would have to make some tough calls. And I would have never thought that we would have had to make as many tough calls as we have had to make over the last 30 days. But the two goals we have in all of this, and I try to go back to this in every briefing that I do, is one, we have to protect the most vulnerable, which are people over the age of 60, which there's a lot of those in our community, and people with underlying or chronic health conditions. That is the principal goal, is to protect those folks. And then also preventing the overrun of our healthcare system. And I know Dr. Rouhbakhsh can speak to that too. We have a certain number of beds in this community. We have a certain number of ICU beds that both our hospitals have been great at expanding. And so everything we do are through the lens of those two goals, protecting the most vulnerable and preventing overrun of the healthcare system, so that if and when people on this call need healthcare or their parents need healthcare, that healthcare is available to them. And so all of those things, while trying to give our private sector economy space to operate creatively within. And I know that's been tough for a lot of people that are on this, and people that have had to hit pause on a lot of things. But with each step, we try to see the landscape for what it is, and based on what's occurring in our community, based on our own data and what it could become by looking at other cities and other parts of the country, we try to always tell the truth and be honest with people, even if it's uncomfortable. And we try to be collaborative and listen to our medical community, dialogue with our small businesses, and make decisions that we believe to be in the best short-term and long-term interest of Hattiesburg. And so that began with limitations on restaurants, then it became going to takeout only, then it became, non-essential retail had to go to curbside, then it became governor's shelter-in-place order, then it became getting our grocery stores to put caps on people that came in. Now it's essential employees wearing masks, all of those things. We see a clear pattern, but with each decision we've made, we've tried to lean on those basic tenets of listening to our own medical community, not paying attention to, bluster on social media or otherwise, but just to keep our head about us and make rational decisions.
Mayor, that's awesome. And, often in life, clarity and communication are key. And I would say in a crisis, those two items are of paramount importance, and you've done a magnificent job with clarity and communication. So again, thank you for being with us today. Speaking of healthcare, Dr. Rouhbakhsh, let's switch over to you. You have provided sage advice for our residents throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. We are so fortunate to live in a community with superb healthcare offerings and expertise. We've all heard a tremendous amount regarding flattening the curve. Where do we currently stand in Mississippi and in Greater Hattiesburg specifically regarding the number of COVID-19 cases? And from a curve standpoint, where do you see us today on the curve, and when do you think the cases will begin to taper off?
Great question. So let's talk about this curve and what it really measures. The curve measures the amount of efficacy your social distancing or your quarantining efforts have made. So we started this early off. We were the first case in the state of Mississippi, and we have a progressive, thoughtful mayor who met with us immediately and started implementing things well before the state did. So what we're seeing are the effects of those distancing measures 2 to 3 weeks ago. And that's what flattening the curve refers to, is are we able to decrease the amount of new cases based on your current social distancing parameters? So the way it's looking, the way it's trending based on these predictive models, which are, again, only as good as the assumptions that you put into them, and no model is going to be perfect, we're probably going to hit our peak based on our current social distancing efforts, probably in the 3rd or 4th week of April. And what that means is that the number of new cases is not continuing to steadily increase. We are at that point now where the cases are steadily increasing. And if that flattens, we're hoping that that flattens and eventually dies off. Now, that is contingent on continuing the current level of social distancing. So people talk about, when is this going to be over? Well, it's not going to be over for a while unless we get lucky. So if we stay distant as we are and it flattens and it eventually hopefully dies off, then once we start going back and milling about again, we're likely going to see those numbers go right back up. So the social distancing that we've implemented thus far will hopefully flatten this curve probably in the 3rd or 4th week of April.
Awesome. Thank you, sir. And that social distancing, I know it was a little odd for everyone to practice at first, but boy, it's become commonplace now. And Mayor, with you implementing the kind of the ordinance related to the mask in the community, that's been important. I tell you that, the first time I wore the mask and went into a grocery store in the city, it may have felt a little odd, but as I got in there, I think probably I was looking around the grocery store and people were practicing social distancing. And I would say in the particular store I was in, about 75% of the folks had masks on. So I think Hattiesburgers are really taking this obviously extremely seriously and adhering to all of the guidelines and recommendations. Well, we all know that the ADP represents the business community, and the business community, many of our members have been, quite frankly, pummeled during COVID-19. So this healthcare crisis has quickly turned into an economic crisis as well, and the small business community has been hit particularly hard. So, Robert, your restaurants and pubs are legendary here in the Burg. I believe you're up to 8 now, and all 8 are based in the heart of the city in Midtown Hattiesburg. Not only is the crisis a medical crisis, but it's definitely spiraled into an economic crisis. The restaurant sector has been hit particularly hard. How do you survive in the crisis and then thrive post-pandemic?
Chad, thank you for including me, and thanks to the ADP and all involved for putting this on. Real quickly before I start, I want to say thanks to the mayor for his leadership throughout this, to Dr. Rouhbakhsh for his great communication in the medical end of this, and to my favorite banker there, Hoppy Cole, who Hoppy and I were meeting, I guess, in his office. It seems like 3 months ago, but I think it was 3 weeks ago. I was trying to get ahead of this thing and making a plan, and Hoppy was extremely helpful, and very grateful that all my PPP stuff is through them. So, we're dealing in new territory business wise, and there's so much unknown at this point that my main focus to at least till now has been the health and safety of all our employees first and foremost, and then after that, making sure that we were helping them in every way we can. And so what I did at first, and around the time I was visiting with Hoppy in his office 3 or 4 weeks ago, is we had all our managers make sure we had all contact numbers, and then everybody who was a supervisor was going to be able to contact we have 300 employees that work for New South Restaurant Group, and so we want to make sure we can communicate with all of them. And again, first and foremost, wanted to make sure they were healthy and safe. Secondly, if they needed anything, family-wise or anything else, if there's a way we could help. And then thirdly, if they needed help navigating the governmental assistance, whether it's through unemployment or something else, we wanted to be able to help them. So that was kind of the priority that brought us to this point. We pretty much shut, Tabella, our Italian restaurant's been the only restaurant open throughout the whole thing and we're curbside now. Crest City Grill, we're gonna open up Thursday. We did a mass filing for unemployment for all our employees, and so there are a few things going forward, and that's kind of the new territory we're going to have to navigate. So your question really is in 2 points. How do we survive it, and then how do we thrive afterwards? And surviving it, I think, is easy. We need to take advice from the leadership of the city, and the leadership of the state, and the leadership of the medical professionals. And we do what they say. I was an early advocate. I talked to the mayor, talked to the governor, talked to a lot of people about, let's just shut this thing down quick. Let's bite the bullet. take our medicine, no pun intended, and just do what we can to socially distance like they're doing. So I'm happy we're doing what we're doing. And I think to survive, we listen to the professionals. We have to sometimes stay away from a lot of the stuff on the internet, and just, we got to trust the people in government. We got to trust the people in medicine, and we take their advice and we follow that advice. And, my mother is at the Claiborne. She's 86, 87, and she's a little confused sometimes, and had gotten out in her car 2 or 3 times looking for toilet paper early on. We had to go, kind of take her keys and make sure people know what's going on. The second part of your question, to thrive afterwards in business, is going to be a challenge, because we're dealing in it's a new paradigm. It's going to be a new world when this thing opens up, whenever it opens up, especially for restaurant business, which is certainly part of the, severely distressed sector the government uses. And so there's going to be a lot of new dynamics that we're going to work under. And we're going to do what we can to follow all those rules and be responsible owners and employers and team members. And so it's hard to answer that. But again, we're putting health and safety of our people first, and then we go from there. And again, thanks for letting me be a part of this. I'm very excited to be in such a esteemed company here.
Absolutely, Robert. I tell you, look, as we try to help local companies grow and prosper and recruit new companies from around the world, I always tell people that there are a lot of surprises about Hattiesburg when we bring in business prospects from around the world. But I would say one of the biggest surprises to them is always the quality of the cuisine. And when we take business prospects to Robert's restaurants, they are always just blown away. I'm like, guys, you shouldn't be too surprised. We're an hour north of the Gulf of Mexico, where we have those Cajun influences from New Orleans area, and we've got the deep South Southern twist. So it's always that eclectic blend of food that Robert and his restaurants provide that keep people coming back. So Robert, thank you for being with us today.
And Chad, thank you. One more thing I'd like to add, and I know it's Paint the Town Red today, and I'm sitting here in black, but my mask that I own is red, and I forgot to bring it. It's sitting over there, but I have a mask and it's red, but I can't wear it during this thing. So
I understand.
I'm doing the red thing.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And I've seen so many red ribbons around town. Folks have those on their mailboxes at place of businesses, and so. This is a resilient community, and we all jump out there and support each other. Hoppy, before I jump over to you, I do want to remind all participants to please go ahead and submit questions throughout the webinar today. We are logging those. At the end, toward the end of the webinar, as time allows, we will take some of the audience or participant questions. So be sure to go ahead and put those into the system for us. Well, Hoppy, I know that we never envisioned your 2020 chairmanship marred by a pandemic, but we will definitely maneuver through together for sure. Hoppy, banks are actually on the front lines of the pandemic too. As CEO of the only publicly traded bank headquartered here in the Burg, what are your thoughts on COVID-19's impact on our economy across the nation, state, and community? And how do you think the Burg will weather the storm economically?
Well, Chad, again, thanks so much for including me, and thanks to my other panel members. I think a lot of what you see here from them is what makes our economy so good. Let me say this. I am so proud of the banking industry, and not just our bank, and we're fortunate to be a member of it, but I'm proud of the way the banking industry, particularly the community banks, have stepped up in this particular situation. So much is the regulatory environment. One thing that makes our country's financial system so strong is that we have 5,800 or so community banks around the country and that we have a fairly strict regulatory process. And as much as we don't like that sometimes, there's a part, and most people may not know this, but every year we have to prepare and submit to the regulators a business continuity plan. And part of that is natural disaster planning, and part of it is pandemic planning. And so although we've never been through it as an industry, we did have at least some framework of a plan of how to respond. I think you've seen that in terms of keeping services alive and being part of the solution and being able to ramp up so quickly. So again, thanks so much again for being included in my other panel members. I think Robert is a perfect example of what I see as I talk to our small business owners across the Southeast. As you know, we serve a 5-state area. We have many different markets. Some are seasonal, some are not. But Robert exemplifies what I see in all of our small business owners. And I'm going to call it fight and tenacity. And we don't have all the answers, but by working together, we're going to survive this. We've survived other things. And, you know, we're going to take it day by day. And so many people have talked about, and really there's no prescription for this. This was not a financial crisis to start. It was a healthcare crisis, which may bleed over into somewhat of a financial crisis. So, but people talk back to 2008 and 9, and they talk about that as, you know, the Great Recession. One big difference to me here is this, that you have this is a small business event and people are fighting for their livelihood. So I expect the response and the ultimate outcome of this to be much, much stronger than even what we saw in 2008 and 9. A lot of that was so much about investment and real estate investment, and it wasn't necessarily, in all cases, people's livelihoods. So I'm encouraged by the fact that I see a lot of fight in people. If you look across our region, again, we've got different markets. There's a lot of uncertainty. Some of the more stable markets, I think, will come back much quicker. And what I mean by that, markets that are not seasonal in nature. Hattiesburg is a perfect example of that. It has the things that make Hattiesburg perform so well in an economic expansion also help buoy us and support the economy in downturns. And we've seen it time and time again. A diversified economic base, a different set of drivers. We're not dependent on one segment. We have a healthcare, you know, a very vibrant healthcare segment. We have a vibrant military and governmental segment. We have a vibrant educational segment. We have a vibrant retail segment. We have a vibrant hospitality segment. We're a regional distribution center to some degree, a regional hub, the hub city. Those are things that will help us and our economy in the Pine Belt, in our view, weather this storm much, much better. Some of our more tourist-oriented markets along the Gulf Coast, you know, I'm concerned there because, as Robert spoke, in the hospitality industry, if they miss their season, then even if we return to some sort of normalcy in 90 days or 120 days or 60 days, whatever that period is, this is a huge part of their summer season. And so it may be a longer term recovery for some of them. But I would tell you that I see a lot of fight, and that encourages me, and I feel better every day that goes by. Robert referred to that first meeting. I think he and I both were scared to death. We might not have admitted it to each other. We wanted to, but 3 or 4 weeks ago, I felt a lot worse than I do today. I see a lot of fight in our people, and it seems to be getting a little better a day at a time. We're just going to take it a day at a time and work together to overcome it.
That's awesome, Hoppy. Thank you. And you know, the ADP has tracked a lot of net new jobs in the last several years, and so the good news is our underlying economic structure was very strong going into COVID, and I think that will help us really accelerate post-COVID. You know, in the last 5 years, we've tracked about 6,000 new jobs and $1.7 billion in capital investment. And for a market the size of Hattiesburg, those are phenomenal numbers. That ranks #1 in the state of Mississippi and among the Gulf South's leaders in the percentage of job growth. So I think that momentum that we had pre-COVID will see rear its head post-COVID. So let's stay on the economy here for a minute. Mayor, we'll circle back to you. Most sectors of our economy are not immune from the significant impacts of COVID-19. The economic fallout is seen among small businesses, large companies, nonprofits, and governmental entities. So how do we pick up the pieces post-COVID and return to a prosperous economy?
Well, I think we have to keep expectations sort of in check. I understand that in a 24-hour news environment, when we see trends in other part of the country that are starting to level off, we naturally think that we are in the same category. And the truth is, as Dr. Rouhbakhsh said, we're probably weeks away from places like New York, California, parts of New England, and DC. Being behind the curve gave us an opportunity to prepare and make adjustments with social distancing and other things. It can also, though, give us a false sense of thinking that we are on the other side of this. We are not. Our numbers are consistently trending in double digits of new cases. 8 out of the last 10 days, including the last 5 consecutive days, we've seen double-digit increases in the metro area in terms of new positive tests. That's Forest and Lamar counties combined. So I think folks first have to come to terms that COVID-19 will be with us for the foreseeable future. Things will not return quickly, whether in deregulation or just in the everyday cultural things that we used to do. Understand that it has been a very long month. And I was thinking back today before this, about to New Year's Eve, 3.5 months ago, that we had 8,000 people in downtown Hattiesburg and struggle to even fathom that a gathering like that can ever happen again, at least anytime soon. The truth is, though, we will recover and rebuild and lead the state in job creation again. We will be that dynamic economic leader in the Gulf South. Our hospitality and tourism sectors will rebound. And I know Marlo's on this call as well. And, I want to thank her for being an advocate for both our hotels and our restaurants. Manufacturing will grow again, but the exact path to opening up all of our economy is uncertain. Our philosophy in all of this has been see the landscape for what it is and what it could be, tell the truth, listen to our medical community, dialogue with our business community, and make decisions based on what we believe to be in the best interest of Hattiesburg. And so, we're not going to take cues from conspiracy theories or social media unrest or just bad science. And I'll say this, though. When we talk about tempering expectations in terms of things getting back to normal, understand that our most vulnerable, people over the age of 60, people with underlying health conditions, will be at risk until there is a vaccine for this. We need to come to terms with that. Does that mean that we're going to be on lockdown until that day arrives? Of course not. But understand that even when we start to see trends reverse and we begin opening up more spaces for the private sector to operate within, we're still at risk. And it's important, and like Robert said, that when we issue orders or even requests and recommendations, that you follow them. And especially with business leaders on this forum, we need everyone to lead by example. Our churches did it for the most part. Our private sector did it for the most part. And I understand that pandemic fatigue is going to quickly set in, but this is going to be here for a while. And so the biggest needs we have right now are, one, if you're open, you need to have masks on your employees. That's a requirement now in the city of Hattiesburg and in Forest County, if they work in the same space as other employees or if they work in the same room as the public. If you go out individually for groceries or to pick up food, you need to wear a mask. This is not a requirement, but we need you to lead by example. In fact, if there's going to be normalcy in terms of marketplaces going into the early summer, the trade-off is likely going to be the continued use of masks to try and keep this thing from popping back up again. And finally, and it seems totally irrelevant right now, but having all of your employees fill out their census form has real implications in situations like these. All of the personal protective equipment that was distributed by stockpiles came based on population. The public health dollars that we're seeing, that we'll see over the next 10 years, and our economy getting back to normal come from those federal census dollars. And so while I realize this is a tough year to do it, the consequences are going to be felt 10 years from now. And so would encourage you, if you haven't gone to HattiesburgCounts.com, and if you haven't filled out your personal census and your employees have not yet, that's a big thing that you can do for us right now. And so that's kind of how I see is tempering expectations and then trying to and sort of kind of taking it one step at a time.
Thanks, Mayor. And you make a great point about the census. I tell you, from an economic development standpoint, the census means an awful lot to our community. Not only the federal dollars and the congressional districts, but also from a job creation standpoint, site selection consultants and companies who are analyzing markets want to locate in communities that have a thriving, growing population base. And so we need every person counted in the city and in our metro area, our 3-county metro area, and really in all of Mississippi. Mississippi is a rural state. with about 3 million folks, and we need everybody counted because you all count. So be sure to do that. Mayor, back to your comment about the need for a vaccine and kind of returning to some normalcy finally, fully once that's in place. This is a good segue back to Dr. Rouhbakhsh. Dr. Rouhbakhsh, how optimistic are you that drugs currently in clinical trials will be available soon for the treatment of COVID-19? And is it realistic to think that a vaccine can be developed and approved in the next 12 months?
Well, I'll tell you from a professional standpoint, the optimism is pretty low. From a personal standpoint, I'm hoping something comes of this that's unexpected, because so many unexpected things have arisen as people have banded together and buoyed their resources. But the evidence thus far has been very poor for the treatments that have been proposed. The French study that hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin was cited multiple times in the media was a deeply flawed study that was published ahead of time just to help people in the pandemic get an idea of what may or may not work, but it is by no means indicative of a good therapeutic outcome. And JAMA just released an article going over this that cited the problems associated with that study. So that is decidedly not good science. And then remdesivir, the Ebola drug, recently had a major setback as the trial was closed in China. So those were the three drugs that we had a lot of hope for. There's an antiparasitic called ivermectin that's shown some laboratory promise. And if we get lucky with something like this, that would be a game changer. And I think it's important to note here, this is a business community who's trying to assess risk going forward. We need a game changer, or this is going to be with us for a very, very long time. And what I mean by a game changer, we need a therapeutic like these medications we've talked about that thus far have really struck out, or we need a vaccine, or we need to get lucky. And what I mean by getting lucky is if we distance long enough and the disease doesn't pass and kind of dies out, it may not come back. Now, that's not been the case with other viruses like this. They've always come back, but we may get lucky. And you talk about vaccines. Vaccines typically take 10 to 15 years to develop because the standard for which they have to prove safety is much, much higher than a therapeutic. Because you're giving vaccines to otherwise healthy people, they need to be even more safe than any medication you may give an ill person. So having said that, there is hope that with the expanded and kind of streamlined processes, we may have a vaccine that's available for market within a year. Now, that's assuming that the vaccines work. So they have to try numerous different mechanisms to see if this will work. So that could be a game changer, but that's not going to happen within a year. And then the other thing that could be a game changer is if there's a seasonal variation in this. And by that, I mean, like the flu, it goes away for a couple, 2-3 months in the summer. But if it is like the flu, then it will just come back. So even if we get lucky with a seasonal variation where it dies off for a couple, 2-3 months, then it will potentially come back. And the question becomes, well, will it die off? Chances are probably not. The other coronaviruses did not have a seasonal variation. We don't understand why influenza has a seasonal variation. And when influenza was novel, like with the swine and avian influenza strains, those were particularly in the temperate and more tropical climates, year-round illnesses that weren't seasonal.
Okay, great. Thank you for those great remarks, Dr. Rouhbakhsh. Robert, let's switch back over to you on the small business side. I know that you recently wrote a column that I read that praised Senator Wicker's leadership in helping craft the CARES Act, the stimulus package aimed at offering lifelines for decimated businesses. How important are the SBA's economic injury disaster loans that are referred to as EIDLs and the forgivable loans provided under the Paycheck Protection Program that we've come to know as the PPP loan or grant program? So how important is all of that in trying to help get businesses back on their feet?
Yeah, Chad, to backtrack a little bit on the first part of that question, Senator Wicker, I think Mississippi's been blessed with some strong senatorial leadership over I mean, you go back to James Eastland, who was chairman of Judiciary and president pro tem of the Senate. You got John Stennis, chairman of Armed Services, also president pro tem of the Senate. Trent Lott, who was majority leader and minority leader, minority whip. And then Senator Cochran, who was chairman of Appropriations. So there's a lot of power there for a small state like ours. But you take all of that and you look at what we're going through right now, and to have Senator Wicker as chairman of Commerce right now, who was one of four people. I think it was McConnell, Rubio, Wicker, and one other who I'm drawing a blank on right now, who actually made the call on that $2 trillion deal. It was the largest legislation ever passed. And so, Mississippi had a senator, Shelby is the other one, that had a voice in that and crafting that. Although I will tell you that Rubio's part of that, and I was a bigger fan of the original Rubio plan was at least for restaurants was a much better and workable situation for restaurants. I'm a part of the Independent Restaurant Coalition, which is a nationwide organization, and we're trying to help and tweak this a little bit, but specifically for restaurants. So there's a lot of problems in PPP for us. I think it's good overall for everyone. I mean, it was a lifeline and it was done quickly. If you think about how fast that legislation was passed, for a $2 trillion piece of legislation was pretty amazing. But there are some problems in it, at least for restaurateurs that I'm hearing from across the state. We've got, and we're actually doing it ourselves. We're getting our people on unemployment, and so they're getting the $100 they would get on unemployment plus the $600 the government's giving them. And it's going to be hard to get those people back to work. I mean, it's a good thing. I mean, you want your dishwashers and your line cooks and those people making, getting as much benefit as they can, and we support that. But from an employer standpoint, it's going to be hard to get them back, and we don't want to get them. We're not going to press. So there are things like that we're working on right now nationally that we can work. But just to say, and dealing with, the banks here and what they were able to do and mobilize in such a quick manner, and to navigate to get that amount of money out to people. We got ours Monday, the first. I don't want to blow smoke, and I know Hoppy's on here, but he hears me say it all the time. I mean, these people acted quickly. They were working over the weekends. They were working late nights. And so kudos to the bankers for getting relief to people quickly. And I know it's still coming in. Although it really, there are some problems there, and we're hoping those get worked out. I will tell you, go ahead, Chad.
Good. I was just going to say, Robert, I tell you, I agree wholeheartedly. The banking community here is just stellar. We have 19 banks and credit unions that are members of the ADP. They are all just not only providing financial assistance, but they are all just community advocates. They really step up and help the nonprofits and others throughout the community. So we are very blessed with a strong banking community.
Agreed.
Robert, as a follow-up, what do you think the new normal will look like post-COVID? Do you think that people will race back to dining in restaurants and brick and mortar shopping, and will be a pent-up demand help drive the recovery? And kind of a follow-up there is, will patrons pay even post-COVID, will they pay a bit more attention to social distancing?
Chad, it's my feeling that we're not going to see an end of prohibition type thing where liquor's flowing in the streets and there are parties, and it's going to be a much different comeback than the only other thing I could compare this to would be when prohibition got lifted, and that was a big party. We're dealing with a more of a medical situation, not a product or a financial situation. So restaurants are going to look different going forward. They're gonna have to act differently. I mean, we're acting differently. We're, like I said, we're doing curbside and about to open up another curbside, and that's completely and totally different. But we have also implemented and immediately back 4 weeks ago when this started happening, we implemented a lot of practices that are good not only for the public but for employees and everything. So there'll be some good that comes out of that. But the restaurant business, I mean, I was talking with the Pat Fontaine, who's the director of the state association, the 45 minutes ago, right before I got on this call. He had called me, and they're going to be a lot of restaurant closures. So specific restaurants, a lot of them aren't going to make it through this thing, and it's just it's a hard thing to navigate. We're going to do our best. We'll come back quicker than places like New York, though. I mean, a lot of if you think about New York restaurants, those are cramped and small, and we're going to be able to distance and do what wherever is the city government or the federal government, whatever is required for us to be responsible business owners. We're going to follow that, but it will be different going forward, and there will be less employment. We employed 300 people a month ago. We've got maybe a dozen working today, and even a month or two from now, it's going to be a fraction of that 300. So what we're trying to do mainly, and I'll finish your question with this, is just live in the solution. And if we'll live in the solution, then we don't focus on the problem. And I've just personally, selfish, have been trying to do that and just do what I can to help whomever and whatever situation there is. And if we keep living in the solution and focusing on that, then the problem will get better, and attitudes will be better too. Because there's gonna be a lot of, I'm sure Dr. Rouhbakhsh will talk about the post-traumatic stress and stuff that we're gonna be dealing with after this. But we got to live in the solution. So thank you.
Absolutely. Robert, I often talk about it's important to have that physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being. And boy, I talked a lot about that pre-COVID, but during COVID, those are all extremely, important items. So I know that your restaurants will bounce back. They're just too good not to. So, and you guys just have such great food and great service. So I know you'll be fine. Hoppy, let's switch over to you and talk a little bit about a little bit more of the banking side. While the PPP Forgivable Loan Program is an SBA program, it's clearly administered by the banks. And I know that area banks have been absolutely inundated with the PPP loan requests since the program launched. In essence, for approved applicants that adhere to all program requirements, up to 100% of the loan proceeds can be forgiven for an 8-week period. Congress is considering appropriating additional funds for this program. Do you think that is the right approach to help businesses get back on their feet and to keep our citizens employed?
Chad, before I answer, let me say, Robert, yeah, thanks so much. But look, it's been all the banks. It's been all the Mississippi banks. And when I talk about community banks, a lot of people tend to think, well, that's an asset size category. Really, it's not. It's a business model category. And so we have a $20 billion bank in the state, and we have a $100 million bank. But I would tell you that all the Mississippi banks are community banks because they focus and they make loans and they take deposits, have a relatively simple business model, but they're focused on what the needs of their community are. And so that's why you've seen us be able to respond, our industry, particularly so quickly with regard to this. So let me say this, I think it is it is part of the solution. Again, if we can get enough bridges to our small business owners to keep them going until business returns and we can get some sort of sense of normalcy back, the things that you talked about earlier were true. Number one, the economy was in really good shape before this, okay? So income levels, net worth, debt levels at the individual consumer part were in really, really good shape. Number two, the banking industry was its best it's ever been in terms of capitalization, liquidity, and diversification. Those are all things that we learned out of the 2008 and 2009 crisis And so in our case, but in all cases, banks are so much better positioned to be able to help and weather this particular storm. And third, I would tell you that the regulatory focus has been much different this time of any cycle I've been through. Most of the time when the economy begins to turn, the regulators begin to focus on the banks saying, okay, we got to tighten up on you guys. You know, you've got to pull your horns in. You got to start identifying potential problem assets. You start getting plans to, you know, exit those assets, liquidate to prevent your losses. Here, the focus has been totally different. It has been, number one, we expect you to be part of the solution because you've got the infrastructure and the network to be able to do it. And you've seen that in terms of the PPP plan. Two, we're going to be as lenient as we can with you. We want you to we want you to work with your borrowers. We know that some are going to need, and it's not a one solution fits all. Some businesses need more working with than others might be, as we talked about in the seasonal part. So the regulatory focus has been much different, which again gives me great comfort. The other thing I would tell you is, and as much as people have knocked the SBA and about a lot of the uncertainty around these programs, it has been a monumental task. And they have been, they were hit just like we were. I mean, I was watching that press conference, I believe it was Thursday 2 weeks ago, when the Secretary of Treasury said, hey, we're going to start taking applications at midnight Eastern. And I went, that was 4:30 on a Thursday. And I'm going, we don't have an application yet. So everybody, the banks really ramped up, and the SBA has been as supportive as they absolutely can, given the monumental side of it. So there's been a relaxation of that. Again, the banks are being empowered to be part of the solution. That gives me great comfort going forward. In the PPP program, I would say this, though, it's one part of the solution. You mentioned the disaster loans. There's some additional programs coming in terms of what Main Street Lending Facility and another Main Street liquidity facility that are more longer term solutions for a little bit larger businesses. So there's a multitude of plans coming out and that will continue to help the businesses. And then I do think that and I was told, I heard the SBA say that they don't intend to have any legitimate PPP application unfunded. So I've heard them say that on multiple occasions on conference calls I've been on. So I would expect there will be more money allocated. But I'll tell you this, and I think our experience is probably like a lot of our community banks. You know, we're probably getting close to about 2,000 applications across our footprint approved. And Robert mentioned we started funding these on Monday, but that's probably about 85–90% of our pipeline that we generate across our 5-state area. So I think a number of people in relatively 7 to 10 day period have gotten a bulk of these applications through and approved, at least what was initially the initial onset of it. So I think a lot of the applications are still out there and need a little work and need a little documentation. I would caution this, though, if I can say this. In these programs, you're making, as a customer, attestations about what the validity of the information is, the accuracy of the calculations, that you have the appropriate authority to buy in the company that's borrowing the money. And so I would just say pay attention to that now, because if we learn from Hurricane Katrina, they tend to reduce the requirements on the front end, the government does, but they will come back and make sure that, you know, these things were done properly. So just pay attention to the attestations that you're making on this and be sure that we're as accurate as possible. That also will be critical in the forgiveness documents. Documentation will be paramount here. And so as we go forward, I would encourage the business owners, be sure you keep very, very good records about how you spent this money and when you spent it, because there are requirements around the forgivability of it. And we'll be having to collect that, and we'll have to verify it. So documentation, again, is always paramount.
That's great, Hoppy. Good advice, good insight. We greatly appreciate our banks and greatly appreciate you. Mayor, we're going to circle back to you with kind of one final question here before we spend the last few minutes looking at Q&A from our participants. Mayor, we've seen many examples of partnerships flourishing during these tough times, and we've seen significant ingenuity in research collaborations between the medical community and Southern Miss scientists and researchers regarding masks and test kits for COVID-19. can you elaborate a bit on these synergies and significant breakthroughs? And Dr. Rouhbakhsh, if you want to chime in here too, sir, that would be appropriate as well.
Well, I think it's in character of our community to try and band together, share resources, and solve problems. I think that from the very outset that we were the first community to put together a stakeholder group of government, health, and education before the first case even hit. I think that you see that in the testing with Southern Miss and Forest General Hospital, the cough and fever clinic collaboration, and Dr. Rouhbakhsh could talk more about this, that was literally set up in 72 hours from us getting our first case. The 3D printing at Southern Miss with Dr. Wan, who has provided health equipment for first responders and health practitioners, collaboration across health organizations. I mean, I understand that everyone's got to make their budget work, but we've seen great collaboration, sharing of information between Merit Health, Wesley, and Forest General, and just grassroots support in mask making and donations. And that spirit of collaboration is going to be very important as we move into the worst of this and as we climb out at some point. I'm sure at some point that I'll be putting together a working group with leaders from government, healthcare, business, and faith-based communities to navigate when to start strategically opening up space for more activity. But the bottom line is that we are a resilient people. And when we share resources and creativity and believe in each other and just be the best version of ourselves, as the city is accustomed to doing when faced with the many challenges that we have had, we achieve and we produce uncommon benefits. And our vision remains that we are going to be the premier city of the Gulf South. We will not be measured in our hopes for this community. And even though we are going through a tough season right now, we will drive through that season if we keep our head about us and if we make good individual and collective decisions.
That's awesome. Dr. Rouhbakhsh, would you like to add anything there, sir?
Sure. I'll add a little bit of detail to the story that Mayor Barker was talking about. So we diagnosed the first case on a Wednesday. Over the weekend, we devised and implemented a cough and fever clinic that went live on a Wednesday of the following week. So that could not have happened without the collaboration of the Hattiesburg Clinic and the Forest General Hospital. And that became a regional referral center, which allowed the other physicians to then take care of their patients without fear of burning through PPE because potential COVID patients were coming to their clinic. We routed everyone to that clinic so that the cardiologists and the pulmonologists could continue doing their thing. And then when we started to burn through our tests, the collaboration with USM was remarkable. I mean, all this time, this major university was literally across the street from us, and we had no idea that they had not just one, not just two, not just three, but 5 PCR machines and all the viral transport media we could handle to do the tests. And we were down literally to our last 50. So without that collaboration and the quick kind of energy put forward from USM, from Forest General, from Hattiesburg Clinic to get that going, we'd be done with our test kits and we'd be in the same situation that everybody else is in, waiting to try to test people. So this community has a lot of resources that were kind of functioning on their own, doing well, business was good, and when we needed it, for them to come together and give us these additional avenues for which we can take care of people was just phenomenal. And it is far more than we deserve for the size of community that we have. We have really a incredible university. We have a hospital that's second or third largest in the state by any metric of business. Hattiesburg Clinic, of course, is by far the largest multi-specialty group in the state. It's just a remarkable confluence of resources that we have here. So I feel very fortunate about that.
That's awesome. And, our economy is built on healthcare, education, military. We've got a strong, diverse manufacturing base and, close to a couple of billion in sales and retail sales. So that diversity in our economy, I think, leads to the strength in our partnerships. And as you said, they were all flourishing pre-COVID, and now during COVID, it has been awesome to see as a resident of the community, all of those large players pulling together and pooling their resources to effectuate positive change. So that's real encouraging for our community. Let's take a couple of questions as we near the 12 o'clock hour here. We've got a few minutes from our participants. Robert, this one of our participants is asking, as restaurants are closed or slowed down during COVID-19, what's being done with the food that can or will expire at some point? I know that's certainly an issue.
That's a great question. A charity I'm affiliated with, Extra Table, has been collecting a lot of that food and delivering it. I don't know how many, we sent a trailer truckload of milk to Jackson yesterday. Most of the perishables obviously are already gone. We helped clear out of a lot of casinos on the coast immediately after they closed. So the canned goods are still on the shelf, but the perishables, we've been making sure to get to other people and to mission pantries and soup kitchens across the state. If anybody has any food they would like to donate, go to extratable.org and just get in touch with us, and that's all we've been doing for the past 3 or 4 weeks, is just getting food from people who have extra to the people who need it. And I know Christian Services, Edward Street Fellowship Center, and many more in this area would appreciate anything they can get, because, and I was talking to Ann at Edward Street a week or so ago, their client list is way up right now. So many people are out of work, so many people are hurting, and they got in, like everybody else has kind of been inundated, they got inundated with new clients and people who need to eat. So that's our most basic need right there. So great question, and thanks for the concern there. Extratable.org.
That's awesome. So many great nonprofits in the area. You know, one thing that we're doing that we'll hopefully be able to unveil this week is we're working with a local manufacturer who produces paper products that's looking to donate some large quantity of paper towels to the nonprofits. And so the food is of paramount importance, but paper towels can certainly help a little bit as well.
I'll tail in on that real quick too. They also need water. A lot of them need a lot of water right now. And so that goes a little beyond restaurant inventory. But if you want to donate, water is a big need right now for mission pantries and soup kitchens.
That's awesome. Mayor, one of the questions we have from a participant really kind of pertains to the essential versus non-essential businesses, you know, how that definition was derived, and, you know, kind of who can remain open, not open at this point. Some are open, you know, as Robert was saying, with curbside service only. So talk a little bit about, I guess, kind of the thought process that goes into determining those items.
Yeah, so the definitions of essential business and non-essential business come directly from the Governor's Executive Order 1463. He defined in our state what qualifies as essential business. Now in Hattiesburg, the good thing is that most of our businesses are deemed essential, and not everyone. I mean, of course, the non-essential retail has been closed, but all of those definitions and what we interpret come from Governor Reeves' Executive Order 1463. He got his guidance from an agency called CISA, Cybersecurity Security Agency, and so that's a division of the Department of Homeland Security. And so if you look at, you know, CISA, or if you look at, you know, Governor Reeves, typically those things kind of jive together. And so, you know, it's not a perfect process. You know, we go by that. And if the Governor's Executive Order 1466, which was the shelter-in-place order, says that non-essential retail is closed, then non-essential retail is closed. And we learn about retailers that are trying to open. And look, I understand that everybody's hurting right now, but the way we get through this is by following the rules together. And so if we hear about things, either from complaints or if people make social media posts that maybe they shouldn't, then we're going to go and address those. We're also making stop-ins to make sure that employees at essential businesses are wearing masks. That's important. That's the way forward for us. Again, if we're going to open some spaces up, the trade-off is likely going to be continued wearing of masks. And the more that people will just individually make good decisions, and that businesses make good decisions for their employees, the sooner I think that we can get through this. But, you know, I understand that everybody wants to open their doors to get going, but we try to enforce these as fairly and as consistently in regards to the Governor's executive order and regards to other executive orders that we have put out.
Awesome. Guys, I want to thank all of our panelists and webinar participants today. I hope that you found this to be as informative as I did as we work together to maneuver through the crisis. Hattiesburgers are resilient. and we will continue to shine in the days and weeks ahead and will emerge stronger post-COVID. Please rely on your ADP team to be a valuable resource during these difficult times. We stand ready to assist. I encourage you to visit our COVID-19 page on the ADP website to access pertinent information that can help your business survive and thrive. In closing here today, I do want to tell you about a couple of upcoming events from the ADP. So our programs and services are moving forward as planned, just in a virtual fashion. First, we have our Pine Belt Young Professionals Off the Clock. We're calling it the virtual happy hour that will be tomorrow evening from 5 to 6 p.m. And I encourage all of our YPs in the community and our PBYPs to participate via Zoom tomorrow, Thursday, April 16th, 5 to 6. I'll be on there. No, I'm not a YP, but hey, I'll be there to participate and have a good time with our young professionals. Then I would like to let you know about our May 1st Accelerate program. Dr. Subarao, Dean of the College of Osteopathic Medicine at William Carey University, will be our keynote speaker, and this will be conducted via Zoom video conference as well. Dr. Subarao will talk about the doubling of the William Carey University Medical School, which is absolutely outstanding, and he'll also touch upon COVID-19. The program is sponsored by Forest General Hospital and William Carey University. I encourage you to continue to stay active with the Area Development Partnership. We value your partnership. We value your membership and investment in our organization. And please contact us if we can be of service to your respective business. Thank you for joining us today on the Zoom video conference, and we will see you around soon at our next Zoom event. Take care, guys.